Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from. That night, at the family gathering, my mother raised her glass and announced to everyone that I'd brought shame to our family while my phone buzzed with a message: Northbridge Square acquisition complete. The entire historic district is now under your control. You'll want to know what I did next, because sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with architectural blueprints and a preservation trust that nobody saw coming. My name is Mia Harper, and I've learned that family gatherings in Des Moines are performances where everyone knows their role except me. The private dining room at the Bradford smelled of prime rib and old money, crystal chandeliers casting perfect light on imperfect people. Grandmother's 90th birthday should have been about her, but the Harper family never missed an opportunity to establish hierarchy. I sat between Cousin Derek's empty chair. He was closing another deal in Chicago, and Aunt Patricia, who kept touching her pearl necklace while discussing her son's promotion at Wells Fargo. Across from me, my sister Caroline, everyone called her Carrie, held court in her Braxley and Dune blazer, the firm's name practically glowing like a badge of honor. She was explaining some landmark preservation case to Uncle Thomas, her hands moving with practiced precision, each gesture calculated to draw attention to her Cartier watch. "The precedent is clear," Carrie said, her voice carrying that particular tone lawyers perfect in their first year. "Historic districts require protection from predatory developers who see only profit margins where others see heritage." My phone vibrated against my thigh. I glanced down discreetly. The message from my acquisitions manager read, "Northbridge Square acquisition complete. The entire historic district is now under your control." My heart hammered, but I kept my face neutral, reaching for my water glass with steady hands. That's when Mother stood up, her champagne flute catching the light. Elaine Harper never did anything without an audience, and tonight she had 32 family members as her captive viewers. She wore the burgundy dress she reserved for occasions where she needed to look both elegant and authoritative. "Before we toast Mother's birthday," she began, her voice carrying that Midwestern politeness that could cut deeper than any coastal frankness, "I need to address something that's been weighing on our family's reputation." The room quieted. Forks stopped moving. Even the servers seemed to pause mid-stride. "This morning's Register featured an article about anonymous investors destroying the character of our historic downtown." She pulled out her phone, reading glasses perched precisely on her nose. Quote, "The shadowy acquisition of Northbridge Square, including the landmark Harper Building named for one of Des Moines' founding families, represents everything wrong with modern real estate speculation." Her eyes found mine across the table. "It seems someone in this room has chosen to align themselves with the very forces that threaten what generations of Harpers built." Every head turned toward me. The silence stretched like Iowa winter. Father cleared his throat, his position as former president of the Heritage Preservation Board giving weight to his words. "The Harper name has stood for civic responsibility for 140 years. We don't sell our legacy to the highest bidder." "We don't even know who bought it," Carrie added, her concern perfectly manufactured. "But whoever it is clearly has no respect for community values. They're probably planning luxury condos or, God forbid, chain stores." I felt the familiar burn of being seen but not known, judged but not heard. The acquisition documents in my phone contained provisions for artist studios, small business incubators, and a community garden, but they didn't want to know that. They wanted their narrative successful lawyer daughter, disappointing other daughter. "Mia," Mother's voice sharpened, "you work in that industry. Surely you must know something about this." I set down my water glass carefully. "I work in operations management. Mother, warehouses and logistics, not exactly downtown real estate." "Still," she continued, "it's all connected, isn't it? This culture of profit over preservation. You must have opinions about what's happening to our city's heritage." The irony was almost delicious. They had no idea they were looking at Prairie Lantern Holdings' sole owner, hidden behind 7 layers of LLCs and a carefully maintained low profile. "I think," I said slowly, that sometimes buildings need saving from the people who claim to love them most. The room bristled. Carrie laughed. That practiced courtroom laugh designed to diminish opposition. That's quite philosophical for someone who spent last month organizing inventory systems. Enough. Grandmother's voice cut through the tension. She was 90, sharp as winter wind, and the only person in the room who ever really saw me. It's my birthday, and I won't have you all pecking at each other like chickens. Mother raised her glass again, her disappointment barely concealed. To Mother, and to maintaining the Harper family standards. Everyone drank. I lifted my glass too, tasting champagne and possibility. My phone buzzed again. Structural assessment complete. Renovation plans ready for your review. They thought I'd brought shame to the family. They had no idea I was about to redefine what the Harper name meant. Growing up as Robert and Elaine Harper's second daughter meant living in a shadow that stretched longer each year. Carrie was 3 years older, 3 inches taller, and 300 times more likely to be mentioned in our parents' Christmas letters. By the time I was 7, I'd memorized my role, the quiet one, the afterthought, the one who'd maybe marry well if she couldn't achieve well. Our house on Grand Avenue was a monument to achievement. Every wall decorated with Carrie's debate trophies, academic certificates, and newspaper clippings. Future Supreme Court Justice. Our father would joke, except it wasn't really a joke. The dining room conversations revolved around case law, constitutional amendments, and which federal judges Carrie should clerk for after Harvard Law. When I mentioned wanting to study business, Mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Business, she'd said, as if I'd suggested joining the circus. But darling, the Harper family has produced lawyers for 4 generations. Even your great-great-grandmother was one of the first female attorneys in Iowa. I was 15 then, struggling through advanced placement history while Carrie was accepting her Yale early admission. The comparison was constant, relentless, suffocating. Parent-teacher conferences became exercises in disappointment management. Mia is doing fine, teachers would say, that word fine hanging in the air like a participation trophy. She's not Carrie, of course, but she's finding her own way. My own way led to Iowa State University, not Harvard, a business degree, not law. While Carrie was making law review, I was learning about supply chains and market analysis. The family dinners during college were torture. Carrie would describe her internship at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals while I explained inventory management systems. Father would nod politely at my stories, then turn to Carrie with genuine interest, asking about judges and precedents and career trajectories. The breaking point came during my senior year. I'd developed a business plan for a small real estate investment company, spent months researching, analyzing, creating projections. I needed $30,000 in seed money, and I'd naively thought my parents might help. After all, they'd paid for Carrie's law school without blinking. I presented it during Thanksgiving dinner, complete with printed prospectus and 5-year projections. Father flipped through it while eating pie, occasionally humming. Mother didn't even look up from her coffee. It's very thorough, Father finally said. That same tone he used when I'd shown him my middle school science projects. But real estate is risky, especially for someone without experience. Why don't you get a good job first? Carrie knows people at several firms that might have administrative positions. Administrative positions, not analyst or associate. Administrative. I could put in a word at Braxley and Dune, Carrie offered, genuinely trying to help in her condescending way. They always need good support staff. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation ribbons and second-place certificates, and made a decision. I wouldn't ask them for anything again. Not money, not connections, not even approval. After graduation, I took a job at Midwest Logistics, working the day shift in operations. The pay was modest, the work unglamorous, but it was mine. I learned every aspect of commercial property management from the ground up: how warehouses operated, what made locations valuable, how to spot underutilized assets. While my parents told their friends I was finding myself, I was actually building expertise. Evenings belonged to education. I took online courses in commercial real estate, property law, tax strategies. I studied successful developers' patterns, learned about LLC structures, understood how to read market cycles. My apartment became a library of real estate books, market reports, zoning maps. When other 20-somethings were at happy hour, I was analyzing property listings and practicing pitch presentations in my bathroom mirror. The family noticed nothing. During Sunday dinners, while Carrie dominated conversations with her cases and courthouse drama, I sat quietly, invisible, accumulating knowledge like compound interest. Mother would occasionally ask about my little job, and I'd give just enough detail to seem cooperative but not enough to reveal my true focus. "Still working at that warehouse company?" she'd ask, unable to remember the actual name. "Still there," I'd confirm, not mentioning the property management license I'd just earned or the network of commercial brokers I was cultivating. They never asked follow-up questions. In their minds, I was frozen in amber, the daughter who didn't quite measure up, who took the safe path, who would never surprise them. They saw what they expected to see: quiet, compliant Mia, content with her ordinary life. That blindness would become my greatest advantage. While they watched Carrie shine in courtrooms, I was learning to move through legal channels they didn't even know existed. While they celebrated her victories, I was identifying distressed properties and understanding renovation tax credits. The Harper family valued tradition, legacy, the way things had always been done. They never considered that someone could honor heritage while completely reimagining how to wield it. They never imagined that their disappointment in me would become the fuel for an empire they couldn't see coming. Prairie Lantern Holdings, LLC, was born at 345 A.M. on a Tuesday morning in my studio apartment. Incorporation papers spread across a coffee table I'd bought from Goodwill. The name came from Iowa's history prairie settlers who'd left lanterns burning to guide others home. I wanted to guide forgotten buildings back to life. My first acquisition was a disaster. Everyone else avoided a former bakery on the south side of Des Moines, contaminated with asbestos, tangled in tax liens, and occupied by pigeons. The owner, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, was desperate to sell but couldn't afford the cleanup. I spent 2 months researching environmental remediation grants, found a federal program that covered 70% of costs, and structured a deal where Frank could defer capital gains taxes by reinvesting in my next project. "You sure you know what you're doing, kid?" Frank had asked, squinting at the contracts I'd prepared myself using templates and countless hours of research. "I'm sure I know what everyone else isn't doing," I replied. That bakery became a co-working space for local artists, not because I was altruistic, but because artists were reliable tenants who improved property values and qualified for cultural district tax breaks. Every decision had 3 layers of logic: financial, community, and strategic. By year 2, Prairie Lantern had acquired 6 properties, all structured through separate LLCs to obscure the connection. I chose buildings others dismissed: the former print shop with foundation issues, the abandoned veterinary clinic with outdated electrical systems, the warehouse contaminated from a century-old paint factory. Each property required deep research, creative financing, and patience that quick-flip investors couldn't stomach. My day job at Midwest Logistics became my education in efficiency. I learned to spot wasted space, inefficient layouts, underutilized assets. Those lessons translated directly to real estate. When coworkers complained about their long commutes, I was mentally mapping traffic patterns and identifying emerging neighborhoods. When they discussed their kids' schools, I was noting which districts were improving and where young families were moving. Nights belonged to transformation. I'd arrive at properties after my shift, sometimes working until 2 a.m., reviewing contractor bids, researching historic tax credits, negotiating with preservation groups. I learned to speak multiple languages fluently: contractor, banker, bureaucrat, and community activist. Each required different vocabulary, different promises, different proofs of competence. The breakthrough came with the Riverside Theater, a 1920s vaudeville house that had been empty for 15 years. The city had condemned it twice, but a local preservation group kept filing injunctions. Everyone saw an expensive headache. I saw an opportunity. I spent 3 months in archives, discovering the theater qualified for both federal and state historic tax credits, 40% of renovation costs combined. Then I found a new markets tax credit program that could provide another 20%. With those incentives, I could renovate for essentially 40 cents on the dollar. But the real innovation was the usage model instead of trying to compete with modern multiplexes. I partnered with the community college's film program, 3 local theater groups, and a nonprofit that taught kids video production. "Why are you doing this?" asked Patricia Corning, the Preservation Society president, when I presented the plan. "What's your angle?" "My angle is that empty buildings don't pay taxes, don't employ people, and don't appreciate in value," I said. "Occupied buildings do all 3. The key was never appearing too successful. I kept my 10-year-old Honda Civic, lived in the same modest apartment, shopped at Target. When I occasionally crossed paths with family acquaintances downtown, they'd see exactly what they expected Carrie Harper's unremarkable sister, probably grabbing lunch between filing reports. Meanwhile, I was building relationships with every small-town bank president in central Iowa, memorizing zoning ordinances for 6 different municipalities, and creating a network of contractors who could renovate to historic standards while staying under budget. I attended city council meetings in Ankeny, Urbandale, Clive, anywhere within 30 miles of Des Moines, taking notes on development plans and infrastructure investments. The portfolio grew methodically. An old grain elevator converted to climbing gym, a defunct department store transformed into medical offices, a printing plant reborn as a food hall. Each project more ambitious, more complex, more profitable than the last. But always under the radar, always through Prairie Lantern's subsidiaries Heartland Ventures, Cornerstone Properties, River City Holdings, boring names that suggested nothing and revealed less. My filing system filled 3 storage units: property deeds, environmental assessments, contractor agreements, tenant leases, tax documents, everything meticulously organized and legally bulletproof. I learned that in real estate, the one with the most complete documentation wins. Not the loudest, not the most connected, but the most prepared. By year 5, Prairie Lantern controlled 43 properties across Greater Des Moines, generating $2.3 million in annual rental income. The portfolio was worth $18 million on paper, probably $25 million if sold strategically. But selling wasn't the point. Building was the point. Proving something was the point. Though I hadn't quite admitted what I was trying to prove or to whom. I hired exactly 2 people, James, a property manager who'd been laid off after 20 years at a commercial firm, and Sophia, an accountant who understood creative financing better than most bank presidents. They knew me as M. Harper, the mysteriously well-funded investor who paid on time and never micromanaged. They didn't know about my day job, my family, or my growing obsession with a particular historic district in downtown Des Moines. Northbridge Square had been calling to me for 2 years, 6 buildings centered around the Harper Building, my family's 19th century legacy turned albatross. But Northbridge required everything I'd learned and more. It would mean revealing myself eventually, confronting not just my family's disappointment but their active opposition. I wasn't ready yet, but I was getting close. The Des Moines Register article that sparked my family's outrage appeared on a Thursday morning, above the fold, with a photograph of the Harper Building looking particularly decrepit in harsh morning light. "Anonymous investor threatens historic district's character," the headline screamed. The byline belonged to Jennifer Morse, a journalist who typically covered feel-good community stories but had apparently found her teeth. I read it at 5:30 a.m., over coffee in my apartment, having already received 17 text messages from various family members. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation without evidence, concern trolling disguised as journalism. More importantly, it had Carrie's fingerprints all over it. Sources familiar with the situation express concern that the mysterious buyer, operating through multiple shell companies, plans to transform the historically working-class neighborhood into another playground for the wealthy. Morse wrote, The Harper Building, named for one of Des Moines' founding families and a symbol of civic pride, now faces an uncertain future. The source's familiar was almost certainly Carrie, who'd been building her campaign for the Preservation Board while establishing herself as the defender of Des Moines' architectural heritage. Her Facebook page, which I monitored through a fake account, had been filled with posts about protecting our history from profiteers for weeks. She needed a villain for her narrative, and the anonymous Northbridge buyer was perfect. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything wrong with the Harper Building for 3 years. The city's own inspection reports, obtained through FOIA requests, painted a damning picture chunks of limestone facade falling onto sidewalks, lead paint peeling in sheets, a roof that leaked so badly the top 2 floors were uninhabitable. The building wasn't just dying, it was dangerous. But those reports had been buried in bureaucratic filing systems, ignored because addressing them would cost millions the city didn't have and the Heritage Preservation Board wouldn't allocate. It was easier to let the building rot while talking about its historical significance at fundraising galas. Carrie's campaign intensified after the article. She organized a Save Northbridge rally that attracted 40 people and 3 news cameras. She gave interviews on local morning shows, her Braxley and Dune blazer and concerned expression perfectly calibrated for television. She even started a petition that gathered 3,000 signatures from people who'd never actually been inside any of the buildings they were supposedly saving. "We cannot let shadow investors turn our heritage into their profit," she said on Channel 8, standing dramatically in front of the Harper Building. "These buildings tell our story. They deserve better than becoming luxury lofts for people who don't understand what Des Moines means." The irony was breathtaking. Carrie lived in a renovated warehouse in the East Village, exactly the kind of development she was rallying against. She'd never shown any interest in Northbridge until it became politically useful. Her sudden passion for preservation coincided perfectly with her campaign for the board position, a position that would launch her toward city council. Then maybe the state legislature. Father joined the chorus, writing an op-ed about the responsibility of wealth and preserving the Harper legacy for future generations. He mentioned his great-grandfather 4 times, the family's charitable contributions 6 times, and actual solutions 0 times. Mother amplified everything on social media, adding comments about values and community while living in a suburb that had bulldozed farmland for McMansions. The pressure campaign might have worked on a traditional investor. Bad publicity affects financing, partnerships, public relations. But Prairie Lantern was self-funded, partnered with nobody they could identify, and had no public relations to damage. Every attack bounced off the LLC structure like rain off a windshield. Meanwhile, I was closing deals with the existing building owners, most of whom were desperate to sell. The Harper Building itself was owned by a trust that hadn't been properly managed in decades. The trustees were 3 elderly lawyers who just wanted out. The surrounding properties belonged to various small investors who'd watched their values crater as the district deteriorated. "I don't care if you're the devil himself," one owner, Marcus Thompson, told me during negotiations. "I've been trying to sell for 5 years. The city won't help. The Preservation Board just makes demands, and my taxes keep going up while the building falls apart." The carefully orchestrated outrage had one flaw: it assumed the buyer intended to destroy or drastically alter the buildings. No one considered the possibility that someone might want to preserve them properly, not just symbolically. The narrative required a villain, so a villain was created from shadows and assumptions. But the real catalyst for family fury came when Carrie tried to leverage the situation for her own gain. She approached me at a coffee shop, coincidentally, of course, 2 weeks after the Register article. She was all sisterly concern and practiced casual delivery. "You know, Mia," she said, stirring her latte with studied nonchalance, "this whole Northbridge situation is really heating up. If you signed our petition, maybe wrote a letter supporting the Preservation Board's efforts, it would mean a lot. Family standing together and all that." "And it would look good for your campaign," I added. She had the grace to pause before responding. "It would show that the Harper family is united in protecting our grandfather's legacy. That building represents something bigger than any of us. It represents structural failure and environmental hazards, I said. When was the last time you were actually inside it? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. You're fighting to preserve a symbol while the actual building collapses. But symbols photograph better than structural engineering reports, don't they? Her expression shifted, the concern replaced by calculation. You know something about this buyer. I know they're probably the only chance that building has of surviving another decade. She leaned back, studying me with her courtroom eyes. Whose side are you on, Mia? The building's, I said, standing to leave. Someone should be. That afternoon, she called Mother. By evening, the family WhatsApp group was buzzing with speculation about my troubling attitude and possible connections to the buyer. The preservation campaign intensified, with Carrie now hinting at legal action to stop the sale. They'd declared war on an enemy they couldn't see, fighting for a building they didn't understand, protecting a legacy they'd neglected, and I was about to show them what preservation actually looked like. The plan crystallized at 2:15 a.m. on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the family gathering. I sat surrounded by documents, laptop screens, and the skeleton of what would become my response to their public humiliation. Not revenge, exactly revelation. The truth, deployed with surgical precision. Step 1 was documentation. I hired Marcus Webb, a structural engineer with 30 years of experience in historic buildings, to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the Harper Building. His report was devastating immediate repairs needed, or the city would condemn it within 90 days. The cost, $4.7 million just to stabilize, another $8 million for full restoration. The Heritage Preservation Board's entire annual budget was $2 million. I filmed everything. Sophia knew a documentary filmmaker, Trevor, who needed work after his Netflix project fell through. I hired him to document the building's condition, the renovation planning, the community meetings I'd been quietly holding with local business owners. Every frame was date-stamped, every interview properly released. This wasn't going to be propaganda, it was going to be evidence. The financial engineering took 3 solid days to perfect. I created the Northbridge Preservation Trust, a legally binding entity that would own the buildings in perpetuity with deed restrictions preventing demolition or luxury conversion. Prairie Lantern Holdings would transfer ownership to the trust, maintaining restoration oversight but surrendering development rights. First National Bank of Des Moines agreed to a 10-year low-interest loan specifically for historic preservation. The Iowa Cultural Trust pledged $2 million in matching funds, but the masterpiece was the tenant strategy. I'd already signed letters of intent with 7 local businesses, a cooperative grocery, an indigenous art gallery, a vocational training center, 2 nonprofit offices, a community health clinic, and a business incubator for women entrepreneurs. The ground floor of the Harper Building would become the Northbridge Community Market, with 30 vendor stalls reserved for local food producers and craftspeople. Every lease included community benefit provisions, local hiring requirements, youth internship programs, and 4 hours monthly of free community programming. The rents were structured to cover operating costs and loan payments while remaining 30% below market rate. It was financially sustainable social enterprise, wrapped in historic preservation, delivered through private investment. I reached out to the fire chief, explaining the safety issues and my remediation timeline. He agreed to appear at the announcement, confirming that, without immediate intervention, they'd have to condemn the building. The city planning director, exhausted by years of preservation board inaction, quietly confirmed she'd support any credible restoration plan. Even the mayor's office, through back channels, indicated they'd welcome a solution to the Northbridge problem. The media strategy required delicacy. Instead of approaching Jennifer Morse, who'd written the hit piece, I contacted David Park at the public television station. He'd produced a series on urban renewal that was actually thoughtful. I offered him exclusive access to document the renovation process, starting with the announcement. "Why should I trust you?" he asked during our meeting at a diner on the east side. "Every developer promises community benefit." I handed him a folder containing 5 years of Prairie Lantern projects. Check every property, talk to every tenant, visit the sites yourself, then decide if you want the exclusive. He called back 2 days later. When's the announcement? The Heritage Preservation Board's annual gala was 3 weeks away. The same event where Carrie planned to announce her board candidacy with my parents' very public endorsement. 500 guests, including every major donor, political figure, and society columnist in Des Moines. They'd rented the grand ballroom at the Renaissance Hotel, with a stage, professional lighting, and live streaming for those who couldn't attend. I bought a ticket under Prairie Lantern Holdings' name, $5,000 for a table, but I only needed one seat. James and Sophia thought I was crazy when I explained the plan. "You're going to out yourself to your entire family at a black tie gala?" James asked. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Both," Sophia said, reviewing the numbers one more time. "But the math works. The trust structure is bulletproof. The financing is secured. The community support is documented. What can they actually object to? The fact that it's me," I said. I prepared for every contingency. The presentation was precisely 8 minutes long enough to be comprehensive, short enough to hold attention. The slides were professionally designed, heavy on images and light on text. I rehearsed 50 times, until every word was natural but exact. I even bought a dress, the first expensive clothing I'd owned, because appearance would matter in that room. The invitation specified that major donors would be invited to speak about their preservation efforts. Prairie Lantern's recent property acquisitions certainly qualified as major. I confirmed with the event coordinator, a young woman who didn't recognize my name, that I'd have a speaking slot. "We're so excited to hear about your preservation plans," she gushed. "The board is very curious about your intentions for the historic district." They had no idea how curious they were about to become. I prepared information packets for every table, architectural renderings, financial projections, signed community letters of support, and the structural engineer's report with its 90-day deadline highlighted in yellow, 200 copies, professionally printed and bound, to be distributed during dessert. The final piece was legal protection. I hired Richardson and Associates, Carrie's firm's biggest rival, to review everything. If she tried to challenge the trust structure or find some legal manipulation, she'd be fighting her firm's chief competitor. The conflict of interest would be delicious. Trevor would be there with 2 cameras, credentialed as documenting the gala for the Preservation Board. David Park would have a news crew stationed outside for interviews. The structural engineer, the fire chief, and 3 of the new tenants would be in the audience as my guests at Prairie Lantern's table. The Harper family had turned my humiliation into public theater. They'd announced to their world that I was shameful, that I'd betrayed their values, that I was lesser. They'd done it with champagne toasts and newspaper articles and practiced sound bites. I would respond with facts, with signed leases and engineering reports, with a legally binding trust that would preserve their precious building better than their speeches ever could, with proof that while they performed preservation, I'd been practicing it. The gala was in 72 hours. My family thought they knew what preservation looked like: cocktail parties, stern letters, and righteous indignation. They were about to learn it actually looked like construction schedules, tax credits, and someone willing to sign the checks. They wanted to preserve the Harper legacy. I was about to show them what that really meant. The grand ballroom glittered with the kind of aggressive elegance that only 500 people pretending to care about old buildings could generate. Crystal chandeliers threw light across tables draped in ivory linen, while a jazz quartet played tastefully in the corner. The stage backdrop featured a massive photograph of the Harper Building in its 1890s glory, before time and neglect had their way with it. I arrived at 7:45 p.m., precisely 15 minutes after the cocktail hour ended. My table near the side stage door included Fire Chief Rodriguez, structural engineer Marcus Webb, and 3 future tenants: Maria Santos from the Community Health Clinic, James Park from the Youth Coding Academy, and Dorothy Chin from the Women's Business Incubator. They knew tonight was significant, but not the full scope of what would unfold. The Harper family commanded 2 tables at the front. Mother wore sapphire blue, her favorite color for being photographed. Father's tuxedo was the same one he'd worn to every gala for 15 years, a point of pride he mentioned whenever possible. Carrie held court in a black gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her Braxley and Dune colleagues flanking her like a legal army. I watched them work the room, all practiced smiles and strategic handshakes. Mother whispered to the mayor's wife. Father cornered 2 bank presidents. Carrie gave an impromptu interview to the society reporter, gesturing toward the Harper Building photograph with telegenic concern. The program began at 8:30 p.m. The Preservation Board president, Harold Whitman, delivered opening remarks about the sacred trust of protecting our architectural heritage. The mayor spoke about public-private partnerships without saying anything specific. 3 donors were recognized for their contributions, which amounted to commissioning studies that gathered dust in city archives. Then Carrie took the stage to announce her board candidacy. She spoke passionately about growing up in the shadow of the Harper Building, though I couldn't recall her ever mentioning it before this year. She invoked our great-grandfather, our family's civic responsibility, the threat posed by soulless development to Des Moines' character. "We cannot let our history be auctioned to anonymous interests," she declared, her voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. "The Harper family stands ready to fight for preservation, not profit." The applause was enthusiastic. Mother dabbed her eyes. Father nodded approvingly. Several people turned to look at their table, acknowledging the family's commitment to heritage. Harold Whitman returned to the microphone. "And now, we have a special announcement from one of our newest supporters, representing the recent acquisition of the Northbridge Historic District. Please welcome the representative from Prairie Lantern Holdings." The room buzzed with curiosity. This was the mysterious buyer everyone had been speculating about. I stood, smoothing my dress, and walked to the stage with steady purpose. The buzz intensified as people tried to place me. I saw the exact moment Mother recognized me, her champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. "Good evening," I said into the microphone, my voice clear and calm. "My name is Mia Harper, and I am the founder and sole owner of Prairie Lantern Holdings." The silence was absolute. Carrie's mouth opened slightly. Father's face flushed red. Mother set down her glass with a sharp click, audible even from the stage. "Before we discuss the future of Northbridge," I continued, clicking to the first slide showing the Harper Building's current state, "let's be honest about its present." The image was shocking: collapsed ceilings, water damage, exposed lead paint. Gasps rippled through the audience. This is the Harper Building today, not as we remember it, not as we imagine it, but as it actually exists. Fire Chief Rodriguez, would you please stand? Rodriguez rose from our table. "Without immediate structural intervention, the city will condemn this building within 90 days for public safety." I clicked through more slides, engineering reports, cost analyses, the harsh reality behind the romantic facade. Then I shifted to the future. Prairie Lantern Holdings has committed $14 million to restore not just the Harper Building, but the entire Northbridge district. The architectural renderings appeared beautiful but realistic. Preservation with purpose. But more importantly, we're establishing the Northbridge Preservation Trust, a perpetual entity that will prevent any future demolition or luxury conversion. The room began to murmur. I saw reporters typing frantically on their phones. "The Harper Building's ground floor will become the Northbridge Community Market, 30 vendor stalls for local producers and craftspeople. The upper floors will house a health clinic, a youth technology center, and affordable offices for nonprofits. Every tenant has committed to local hiring and community programming." I clicked to the final slide, a photograph of the actual signed trust documents. This isn't a proposal or a possibility. The trust is established. The financing is secured. The tenants are committed. Renovation begins Monday morning. The information packets appeared at every table, distributed by the catering staff I'd coordinated with earlier. People immediately began flipping through them, seeing the letters of support, the financial guarantees, the architectural plans. The Harper family legacy, I said, looking directly at my parents' table, isn't just a name on a building, it's what that building does for its community. Prairie Lantern Holdings is honored to ensure that legacy continues not through galas and speeches, but through concrete and contracts, preservation and purpose. David Park's news crew was visible through the ballroom's glass doors, ready for interviews. Trevor's cameras captured every reaction. The society reporter abandoned Carrie and rushed toward the stage. Harold Whitman stood, clearly unprepared for this development. This is unexpected. Ms. Harper, are you saying? I'm saying the Northbridge district is saved, not symbolically, but literally. The trust documents are irrevocable. The building will be preserved according to the strictest historic standards while serving the community's actual needs. Isn't that what we're all here to celebrate? The applause started at my table, Maria Santos clapping enthusiastically, then spread through the room like wildfire. People stood, perhaps as much for the drama as the announcement, creating a standing ovation that cameras captured from every angle. I saw Carrie trying to move toward the stage, her face a mask of controlled fury. Father had turned pale. Mother stared at me like I was a stranger wearing her daughter's face. "Thank you," I said into the microphone as the applause continued. Prairie Lantern Holdings looks forward to working with the Preservation Board, the city, and the community to restore not just buildings, but purpose. The Harper Building will stand for another century, not as a symbol of what we were, but as a foundation for what we're becoming. I left the stage as the room erupted in questions, conversations, and chaos. The perfect preservation gala had become something else entirely, a revelation that the Harper family's biggest threat and greatest ally were the same person. Their disappointment in me had just become the city's gain. Carrie reached me before I could leave the stage, grabbing the microphone from Harold Whitman's uncertain hands. Her courtroom voice carried across the ballroom, sharp as winter ice. "This is exactly the kind of deception we've been warning about," she announced, her face composed but her eyes blazing. "My sister," she emphasized the word like an accusation, "has been manipulating this situation from the shadows, using our family name while hiding behind shell companies." I stopped walking and turned back to face her. The entire room held its breath. Every document is public record, Carrie. Every LLC filing, every permit application, every tax record. The only deception here is pretending you care about that building beyond its value to your political campaign. She pressed forward, sensing blood. "You've been lying to our family for years, pretending to be, what was it Mother said, working in warehouses, while secretly buying up our heritage." "I never lied," I said, taking the microphone Harold offered me with shaking hands. "I said I worked in operations and logistics. I do. I operate 43 properties and manage the logistics of their restoration. You just never asked for details." Marcus Webb, my structural engineer, stood up from our table. "May I address something?" His voice commanded professional authority. I've inspected over 300 historic buildings in my career. The Harper Building is in the worst condition I've seen that hasn't already collapsed. Without Ms. Harper's intervention, you'd be holding a memorial service for it within the year, not a gala. "That's convenient," Carrie shot back. "Hiring your own expert to—" "I hired him too," Fire Chief Rodriguez interrupted, standing. "3 months ago, for an independent assessment. Would you like to see my copy of the report? Or should we discuss the 4 citations for safety violations that the Preservation Board has been ignoring?" The crowd murmured. Reporters typed faster. Harold Whitman looked like he wanted to disappear into the Victorian wallpaper. Carrie changed tactics, appealing to the audience. "Even if the building needs work, the community deserves input on its future, not secret deals made by someone with no transparency, no accountability." "The community meeting minutes are in your packet," I said, gesturing to the bound documents now spread across every table. Page 47 through 92. 16 meetings over 8 months with neighborhood associations, business owners, and residents. You're welcome to review the attendance sheets. Your name isn't on any of them." Mother stood up from her table, her voice cutting through the room's noise. "Mia, this is not how family business is conducted." "Family business!" I turned to face her fully. "When has this family ever conducted business with me? When I asked for startup capital, you told me to find a nice administrative position. When I tried to discuss redevelopment, you said it wasn't suitable dinner conversation. The only time this family notices me is when you need someone to compare unfavorably to Carrie." "That's enough," Father commanded, using his patriarch voice. "This is neither the time nor—" "Actually, Robert," Mayor Patterson interrupted from her table, "I think this is exactly the time. The city has been waiting 5 years for someone to save Northbridge. Your daughter just committed $14 million and created a perpetual trust. I'd like to hear more." Maria Santos from the Community Health Clinic stood. "Our nonprofit has been looking for affordable space for 3 years. Every developer wanted market rate rents we couldn't afford. Ms. Harper offered us below market rates with a 10-year freeze. She also connected us with 2 other healthcare providers to share resources. That building will serve 8,000 low-income residents annually." James Park added his voice. "The Youth Coding Academy will train 100 kids per year in technology skills. Free, Ms. Harper arranged sponsorships from 4 tech companies to cover operating costs. Dorothy Chin from the Women's Business Incubator stood last. 30 women-owned businesses will launch from the Harper Building. Each gets 6 months free rent, mentorship, and connection to capital. This isn't gentrification, it's community investment." Carrie tried one more attack. "And what's your profit from this humanitarian gesture?" I pulled out my phone and showed the trust documents on the screen behind us. "0. The trust owns everything. I'm the trustee, but draw no salary. All revenues above operating costs go back into building maintenance and community programs. It's all there in Section 12, which your firm Richardson & Associates verified independently." The mention of her rival firm made Carrie's jaw clench. Several Braxley and Doone lawyers at her table shifted uncomfortably. "The real question," I continued, now addressing the room, "is why the Preservation Board and certain board candidates have spent more time generating headlines than solutions. How many fundraising galas have you held while these buildings deteriorated? How many press conferences announced grand plans that never materialized?" Harold Whitman finally found his voice. "Ms. Harper, the Preservation Board has limited resources. You have $2 million in annual funding and $38 million in accumulated endowment," I said, having done my research. "You've spent $800,000 on studies and consultants for Northbridge alone. Prairie Lantern spent $14 million on actual preservation." The mayor stood, commanding attention. "I move that the city formally recognizes Prairie Lantern Holdings and Ms. Mia Harper for their contribution to historic preservation." She began clapping deliberately. "And I'm personally inviting Ms. Harper to present her model at next week's city council meeting." The applause that followed wasn't universal. My family's tables remained conspicuously still, but it was overwhelming. The society photographer captured Carrie standing frozen on stage as the room celebrated around her. The headline would write itself. I walked to my parents' table, leaning down between them to speak quietly. "The Harper name isn't yours to gatekeep. It's not Carrie's to leverage. It belongs to anyone who actually honors what our ancestors built with work, not words." Mother's face was stone. Father couldn't meet my eyes, but grandmother, 90 years old and sharp as ever, raised her champagne glass to me with the smallest of smiles. "The trust documents are irrevocable," I announced to the room. "The preservation is guaranteed. The community benefits are locked in. No board votes. No political campaigns. No family dynamics can change that. The Harper Building is saved." As I walked toward the exit, David Park's news crew surrounded me. Behind them, I saw 3 major donors approaching Harold Whitman, their faces serious. 2 of Carrie's campaign supporters were quietly gathering their things. The last thing I heard before leaving was Carrie at the microphone, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. This doesn't change the need for proper board oversight. But the room was already moving, flowing toward the exits. toward tomorrow's headlines, toward a story about the Harper daughter who'd saved the family legacy while the family tried to stop her. The preservation gala had preserved something after all, just not what anyone expected. The parking garage was nearly empty at 10:15 p.m., my heels echoing against concrete as I walked toward my 10-year-old Honda Civic. The autumn air carried the smell of coming rain and distant diesel exhaust. My phone buzzed continuously messages from reporters, city officials, preservation groups, and numbers I didn't recognize. I silenced it all. The dress I'd bought for tonight would probably never be worn again. It had served its purpose, like a costume for a play that only ran once. Tomorrow I'd be back in jeans and work boots, meeting contractors at 7 a.m. to begin the actual work of saving what my family had only talked about saving. My phone lit up with a text from James, my property manager. Preservation Trust bank transfer confirmed. Construction crew locked in for Monday morning start. The money was real. The plan was real. The buildings would be saved. I sat in my car for a moment, key in the ignition but not turning it. Through the garage's open sides, I could see the Harper building 6 blocks away, illuminated by streetlights that made its decay look almost romantic. By this time next year, those broken windows would be restored, the limestone cleaned, the rooms filled with the noise of vendors, children learning to code, women building businesses. Another text. This one from Sophia. Channel 8 is leading with your story. Headline: Harper heiress saves family legacy. Despite family opposition. You're trending on local Twitter. I finally started the car, the familiar rattle of the old engine somehow comforting after the evening's orchestrated elegance. As I drove past the hotel's main entrance, I saw Carrie being interviewed by 3 reporters simultaneously, her hands gesturing sharply, probably trying to spin the narrative back in her favor. Good luck with that. Truth has a way of resisting spin when it comes with structural engineering reports and signed contracts. Mother and father were nowhere to be seen. They'd probably left through the back entrance, avoiding the cameras and questions. Tomorrow they'd craft a statement, something about supporting preservation while having concerns about process. They'd find a way to claim credit while maintaining distance. It's what they did best. But grandmother, I'd seen her speaking with Maria Santos before I left, really listening, asking about the clinic's plans, 90 years old and still capable of surprising everyone, including me. The drive home took 12 minutes through empty downtown streets. I passed 4 of my other properties, the old bakery turned co-working space, the print shop now housing artists, the veterinary clinic converted to senior housing, the warehouse that had become a makerspace. Each one saved from demolition, generating income, serving the community. My empire built in silence, revealed only when necessary. Back in my apartment, I hung the dress carefully in the closet next to my work clothes. The contrast made me laugh silk and denim, performance and practice. On my coffee table, the original Prairie Lantern Holdings Incorporation papers sat next to tonight's trust documents. 5 years of planning reduced to paper and signatures. My laptop showed 47 new emails. The one that mattered was from the construction foreman. Dumpsters delivered. Scaffolding arrives at dawn. Let's save this building. I opened my window, letting the cool air flow through the apartment. Somewhere in the suburbs, my parents were probably discussing damage control over Brandy. Somewhere in her East Village loft, Carrie was planning her counter-narrative. Somewhere in assisted living, grandmother was probably smiling that secret smile she saved for when Harper women surprised people. But here, in my ordinary apartment with its second-hand furniture and walls covered in building permits and architectural drawings, I finally felt the weight of what had happened. I'd won, but victory wasn't the right word. I'd revealed. I'd preserved. I'd proven that disappointment could be transformed into determination. That being unseen meant you could work without interference, that the best revenge against low expectations was exceeding them so dramatically that no one could ignore you again. The Harper Building would stand for another century, not as a monument to my family's glory, but as a working building serving its community. The Harper name would be preserved, but redefined, not lawyers and galas and newspaper quotes, but health clinics and small businesses and children learning skills for jobs that didn't exist when the building was born. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. Ms. Harper. I own 3 buildings in Cedar Rapids facing similar challenges. Could we discuss your preservation model? And so it began. Not an ending, but a transformation. The Harper legacy wasn't being destroyed or preserved. It was evolving. One building at a time, one truth at a time, one saved piece of history at a time. I placed my hand on the trust documents, feeling the weight of paper that carried the weight of promises. $14 million, 43 properties. One family's reputation forever changed, all because they'd pushed too hard the one person they'd never bothered to truly see. The Harper building would be saved. The Harper name would endure. And Mia Harper, warehouse worker, family disappointment, secret real estate mogul, had written herself into the story they'd tried to write without her. A building saved, a name reclaimed, a legacy earned, not inherited. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about family, redemption, and what it really means to preserve a legacy. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments.